Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us tonight. I apologize for the long delay in starting. This is one of a number of programs that are happening this week as part of the North Korea Freedom Week, which takes place once a year, organized by the North Korea Freedom Coalition with Suzanne Scholte and Kim Sun-min on the US and Korean sides, respectively, leading the effort. It's been going on now for almost 20 years. And this year's theme is Open North Korea, which speaks for itself: open hearts, open minds, and open borders. And there are a number of exciting programs. So if you get a chance, look at the program. I think you've all been emailed the website and have access to it. We are starting late, and my great apologies for that. And the reason why we're starting late is because there has been a little bit of a misunderstanding. As you know, there is a 12-hour difference between us and Korea. The defectors who are speaking today are in Korea, and I think the time zones didn't translate correctly. So we are currently without the intended speakers because they thought that the time was in Korean time, and we're just in a little bit of a spot. So what we shall do instead, and I greatly appreciate your patience, is we will have the organizer of the week speak, followed hopefully by the Korean organizer of the week, and then have a general discussion. So before we do that, a word about the sponsorship for the evening. The evening is being sponsored by Isabella Foundation. We are a charity with a mission to help North Korean orphans, both within North Korea, getting them out of North Korea, and those that are in China, helping them in China and helping them out of China. That was the original mission. We have expanded the mission in the last couple of years to also help women from North Korea who have been trafficked to China. And I think you all know that this has been a big issue. North Korean women going to China to earn money or get food for the family, food being scarce in North Korea, often go under naive expectation that they'll find a job, send money back to North Korea in return. They are taken across the border and then trafficked, sold into what's slavery, not just sex, but slavery, period. So we are concerned with helping them and helping those that can be helped. With that, I would like to introduce the first non-planned speaker for the night, and that is Suzanne Scholte. Suzanne is a remarkable woman whom I have had the great fortune of knowing now for close to 15 years. So way before North Korea was on anybody's mind, Suzanne realized the plight and hardship of the country, which is essentially one big concentration camp, and started single-handedly to efforts to try to help the country and its people. And her energy is just phenomenal. No number of nuclear power plants can equal Suzanne's energy. And she has applied that energy across the spectrum of human rights in North Korea. She's also got an interest in human rights elsewhere in the world. But the spectrum of her activity is just astonishing. And it ranges from the single individual who is in distress in North Korea or China trying to escape, to passing acts of Congress in the US and everything in between. She is probably the most engaged person in North Korean human rights. She has received recognition for that. Amongst that recognition is the Seoul Peace Prize, which is awarded, I think, once every 3 years or so. And other recipients of that award before her were Václav Havel and George Shultz from the Czech Republic and the US Secretary of State. So with that, I think we're very, very lucky to have Suzanne talk to us. Suzanne has been closely monitoring the situation in North Korea as it has evolved during the COVID-19, which I think has struck there in terms of its consequences extremely harshly. We don't know how bad it is in terms of health outcomes, but we know that the secondary consequences, namely on economy, people's welfare, and the policing of the state have been very severe. So with that, Suzanne, thank you so much, and the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Klein. I really appreciate you with that incredible introduction. I want to thank Isabella Foundation for sponsoring this session. The theme for this 18th annual North Korea Freedom Week is Open North Korea. And we had a session earlier this week with AEI on opening the minds of people in North Korea. And then just this afternoon, opening the hearts of the people in North Korea. And now we're going to be talking about opening the borders of North Korea. And I wanted to start by saying that this pandemic is one of the reasons why we had to go virtual. Last year, North Korea Freedom Week was all virtual, but the events were isolated in the sense that they weren't interactive like we're doing now. So the thing that's unique about this year's North Korea Freedom Week is we are having the defectors present jointly with very well-known and highly regarded institutes here in the United States, like the Isabella Foundation. So I'm really grateful for that. But I wanted to start by saying, because of the pandemic, we have a situation where we don't really know how bad things are in North Korea. This is an example of why opening borders, opening North Korea is so important. Now, I want to tell you what the North Koreans say, what is said about North Korea regarding the COVID, and what are some of the facts that we do know. First of all, North Korea claims they have had no cases of COVID and that they have the best medical system in the world. So they had the best responses to the pandemic. And they've refused help. Even the South Korean government offered to provide vaccinations, but Kim Jong-un's sister rebuffed that, saying they didn't need them. So that's what the North Koreans are claiming. So we don't really know the extent of what's going on in North Korea. And that's why it's so important for the opening, for information and to continue to have this exchange of information back and forth and across borders. So what is said? Well, the WHO, if you go to the World Health Organization website and you look up the number of cases by country, there's information about all the different countries. The information on North Korea says that there's no confirmed cases of COVID and there's no deaths. And all recent testing that North Korea has done has come back to be negative, so that there's no new examples of COVID that have happened in since the new year started. So what is fact? Now here's what is fact. We know that North Korea was the first country to shut down. They shut their border on January 22nd, 2020. They were the first country to shut down. And because of that close border, the border with China, we expect that there actually was a severe outbreak of COVID in North Korea. Some of the rumors that we've heard that have come out is that people were basically locked up that had COVID. We know that over this past year and a half, only 229 North Koreans were able to escape, which is a dramatic drop over the years. It's the lowest number in 20 years that we're able to get up to get out. We also know, this is a fact, that there is a shoot to kill order. So North Korea has been terrified of COVID, and they have a shoot to kill order. They've shut their border down, and they've warned citizens in China to stay away from the North Korea border. And interesting to note is that, and again, I'm just giving you some of the facts that we do know, is that during the 8th Congress meeting of the Korean Workers' Party, we noticed that all the Korean Workers' Party members, none of them were wearing masks. So it is possible that they were able to prevent COVID from coming into Pyongyang. And we suspect, I'm giving you, that's a fact, because you can see the pictures of the Korean Workers' Party, but we suspect that they did such a dramatic shutdown, and they shut areas down that did have a COVID outbreak, that they were able to keep it out of Pyongyang. Now, all of this is to say that this is why information getting in and out of North Korea is so critically important. And some of the witnesses, which I hope will be joining, have been documenting what's happening inside the actual country. And we do believe, this is another fact, that Kim Jong-un has been warning that there is going to be another arduous march. And so what that tells us is that he is anticipating that there will be millions of people that may starve to death. So there isn't a more important time, I believe, than right now to be coming up with ways that we can help open up the border of North Korea. For example, we have the South Korean government has been doing everything it can to stop information from going into North Korea. And we know that the people of North Korea are hungry for information. We also know that that people are there are defectors that have made it to China that are in detention in China right now, and so this is something that gives us an opportunity to get them safely resettled to South Korea, and that's something that we've been calling on the South Korean government to do. And as you know, Pavel, there's so many orphans and children that have been impacted by the starvation in the past. And I know the Isabella Foundation has been very involved in helping traffic women and trying to help shelter orphans. Well, we can anticipate that we probably have a situation that is just as bad as what happened in the past when there were so many children that were lost their parents because of the starvation during the Arduous March. So one of the things that we're trying to do is to call on the humanitarian organizations, and including the United States government, to offer humanitarian aid. It's something that the Congress has been very much in support of, and we're going to have a lot because of the Operation Warp Speed. The U.S. is going to actually have a lot of extra COVID vaccines, and we should be offering to do what we can to help the people in North Korea. And I think that those are some constructive things that we can do, because they also show the people of North Korea how the international community really cares about them. One of the things that came out during some of the interviews we've had with some of the recent defectors is they had believed that the U.S. government, if it was the Republicans that were in control, they wanted to destroy North Korea with nukes. If it's the Democrats in control, they think the Democrats want to starve them to death. And of course, all of that's a complete lie, because the U.S. Congress has been completely united in the standing up for the human rights of the North Korean people, but also in sanctioning the regime. And in these economic sanctions have had a direct and powerful impact on the regime itself. We know that has had an impact. But the North Korean people need to know that the U.S. Congress very carefully crafted the sanctions so that they would not impact the people of North Korea. And that is something that the people of North Korea need to know. And that's why the importance of getting information in. They need to know the truth about how our American people, how our Congress, how they deeply care about the people of North Korea. And unfortunately, we're in this really dangerous period where the South Korean government is preventing the flow of information from going in and directly doing the bidding and doing the requests of the Kim regime. So it's really important for organizations like the Isabella Foundation, with the work that they're doing, to continue to be in this raising awareness about what's happening and trying to come up with ways to help save refugees in China, save trafficked women that have been trafficked, but also protecting the orphans. So you just want to make those points about the situation. And I know that Kim Sung-min's on it. Would be good, because we aren't having as many people escape as we have in the past. But I know that Kim Sung-min has direct contact and is continuing to get information out. So it would be good to have Kim Sung-min share a bit about what he's hearing about the current situation in North Korea. Is there no COVID? Is everything fine? Are they getting ready, to have an artist march? Or what are the things that he's hearing from people in North Korea? So if we could have Kim Sung-min share his thoughts about the situation currently in North Korea.
And for those of you who may not know it, Kim Sung-min is another extraordinary person who defected from North Korea quite some time ago, and has been actively disseminating information about North Korea, both out of North Korea and back into North Korea, and has been running a radio broadcast that is run by the defectors with him in charge, and has got a network of information gathering within North Korea that allows information to come out of North Korea and then be broadcast back into North Korea. The Free North Korea radio is very popular in North Korea and listened to avidly, and is a source of information for the West, often not reported elsewhere. So Kim Sung-min, thank you.
We also see Kim Hee-yeon has joined us, and maybe after Kim Sung-min shares a little bit about what information he has, we can go to Kim Hee-yeon.
Yeah. All right. Then we are being joined by two of the speakers, and thank you so much for joining us. I know it's been a little bit of a challenge, so thank you for joining us. And Kim Hee-yeon, very nice to meet you. I'm Pavel Klein from Isabella Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, US time, morning Seoul time. Are you ready? So let me introduce Kim Hee-yeon. Kim Hee-yeon left North Korea in 2014. She had worked as an Onsong Regional Propaganda Department as a designer, painter, and she is currently pursuing a bachelor's degree in business administration at the Kyunghee University. She is the president of the Association for International North Korean Defector Women. And she will talk to us about international cooperation to improve North Korea human rights. And we're very lucky to have her. Now, before Kim Hee-yeon starts, perhaps the rest of everybody else who's not speaking, if we could put our microphones on mute, that would be wonderful. And if you would mind translating that into Korean, that would be great. Thank you.
So my name is Kim Hee-yeon. So first of all, I would like to speak about how to support the activities for North Korean women's human rights. And first of all, I would like to thank Mr. Klein and Ms. Scholte for this opportunities that I could speak about North Korean women's human rights. And then the first of all, what I would like to touch upon is that, and then in South Korea in 2019, there was this Miss Han Sang-wook died from starvation. So not just about North Korean women's right, and then there is aspect that we have to pay attention even for marginalized group and women in South Korea. So we are trying to expand our activities, not just for North Korean, but then current situation is really dire, and then we're short on funds and aids, and there's a lot of obstacles that we need to overcome. And then, well, a lot of people say that North Korean people left the land of the death. And then in North Korea, there is no electricity, and then there was and um, there was no electricity to food. And then after we came to the South Korea, and then they said there is electricity, there is a food to eat, but then the reality of North Korean women who defected to South Korea, and then but there are many North Korean people who are still in darkness and in pain. They even um, regret why did we come why we need to starve after we came to the U.S. So some people actually gave up their life. This is not just one person's work. And then we have to actively help North Korean defectors can settle well in their new country. And then this is our pleading and our wish, so that the other organizations who are interested in our this undesirable reality. So I am asking you. So and according to this government, South Korean government policies, yes, there is this. They have to delegate their aids to different types of marginalized people, but then there is no specific or special aids available for North Korean people. And then I don't know if there's actually policies that are designed to help us, but then the reality, the aid that we feel on our skin, it's not there. It's far from us. And as I mentioned before, the North Korean defector starved to death. And of course, I would like to believe that the current administration will and is doing something to help North Korean refugees. But I don't know. The North Korean defectors or refugees are actually living as a South Korean citizens, the righteous citizen that they have right to all the same policies and the benefits and help. So the single moms, the North Korean defectors, women who are a single mom. And I just like to say that just because there is the basic freedom, you can go out on the street and then walk on the street and then you have food to eat. That's not everything. That doesn't mean that this person is living a happy life. And then remember, these people are defected from North Korea. They're away from their family members and their friends, and then they're lonely in this new country. And then, and even if there is aid available, and then I have to speak of this Han Sung-ho mom and son's starvation. And this was very discouraging and then despairing a lot of North Korean people who defected to South Korea. And I think they're just meeting basically the minimum living condition. So as the person who is in charge of this organization who's working to help these North Korean women. So, So there are many different the aids and help are needed, and I think it has to be helped not from just a Korean government. It has to be coming from outside of the country as well. And well, at least, I mean, of course, North Korea, it was the country that we escaped, but then we grew up there and then we gave up everything. And then we left the country and then came to another country to live better. But then the reality could be far from it, so that you need to. So I would like to say that Mr. Pavel Klein said that I am pleading. So since you're here, and then currently the South Korean administration just cut off all the aids and then funds, benefits that were available to North Korean defectors, especially females. So there were many different types of North Korean defectors. They were marginalized a group within that North Korean defectors, and you need to find them and then see how they're living. And I know that I am not really speaking very well today. I am just speaking whatever comes to my mind, and it's lack of preparation, I guess. But then once again, I sincerely hope and so new policies and help and aid will be available for this marginalized group within the North Korean defectors. So please help us. Please do not stop paying attention to us. So I was on my way to work, but then like all of a sudden I ended up participating. So I know that I am not speaking. Some of our my remarks doesn't make sense. I understand that, but thank you very much. So.
Thank you so much, Kim Hyeon, for that presentation. If you could, I would be grateful if you could stay on, because we shall have questions later on. If you can defer going to work for another hour, I'd be very grateful. Ms. Kim Hyeon, thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
I would like to ask, if I may, Dr. Lee Ran to speak. Dr. Lee Ran left North Korea in 1999. She has a PhD in food and nutrition from the Ewha Women University. She's the director of the Center for Free Unification Culture. She won international food competition in Korea. She has been ambassador of the National Unity, and in 2010, she won the United States State Department International Women of Courage Award. That's an award that's given to women with extraordinary engagement in dangerous and self-effacing situations. And she was presented that award by then Secretary Hillary Clinton. Dr. Lee Ran will talk to us about human rights, women's rights, and the food shortage situation in North Korea. So thank you so much for joining us. And please, the floor is yours, as we say in English.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I am Yeran. Thank you for the introduction. I apologize for our glitch in communication. I defected in 1999, and I was able to reap a lot of benefit more than other defectors. I'd like to share a little bit about the human rights reality. I want to share the reality of the human victim of a human trafficking in women in Korean women in China. And they even call North Korean woman in China as a pig. And that's such a telling reality. About 80% of our defectors are women, and many of them were victims of human trafficking in China, and they come to South Korea and try to settle, but none of the politicians in South Korea are paying attention to this plight. And many North Korean defector females suffer sexual violence and like a slave like a labor, and they come to when they come to South Korea and they get victimized again in South Korea, and that's well manifested in Han Seung-ok incident where this mother and son starved to death, and many people question why didn't they ask for help, why didn't they work. She was a victim of human trafficking, and she barely escaped to South Korea, and they began to settle. Now, as a mother, she longed to see her child in China. So she went back to China, and she ended up meeting that man again. And when she came to with a man together to South Korea, while she was pregnant with the second child, she kept, physical abuse, violence, and because of that trauma, the child was born with a seizure handicap, and she has a fit of a seizure occasionally. So mother had to take care of the child. She could not work, and the man was, dysfunctional. So she could not pay the phone bill, and her phone service was connected, and she was like in a lonely island. So she ended up being starving to death with a child. So North Koreans in North Korea, in China, in South Korea, in all these three nations, North Korean women are suffering. 35,000 among 35 defectors, 80% are women, because that tells how severe the violation of human rights are in women in North Korea. In North Korea, in addition to the suffering in their domestic life, they are engaging in they suffer so much suffering. The journey of escaping from North is a dangerous and very difficult, harsh condition. They have to worry about their child. Their child cannot cry on the way to escape. They have to worry about a diaper and many other needs. So the 80% of that 35,000 defectors means that North Korean, the situation of human rights suffering in North Korea for women is worse than men. So when they come to South Korea, we know that the freedom is more important than life itself. Now, during this, now I know this is the 18th year that North Korean Freedom Week. I believe that this event has to be held in Pyongyang someday. What North Korean people need the most is not the food, but it's a freedom. They are not, ignorant people or stupid people. they hunger and thirst after the freedom. They want to fight for freedom. They want to struggle for freedom with their own strength, wisdom, and knowledge. They want to achieve. They can become. They have the capacity to make the North Korea one of the most prosperous nation in the world if they are given an opportunity. I know that United States is like a benchmark for freedom and democracy. And I thank you and I continue to encourage you for your effort to work for freedom in Korean Peninsula. And I heard about emergence of first South Korean government after World War II. I heard that many Korean compatriots in the foreign countries, like in the United States, like Seungman Lee, insisted that South Korean government has to be modeled after, free democratic government like United States. Now, the 35,000 defectors in South Korea, they work together with the citizens of the world that they will topple North Korean regime, and we want to give gift of freedom to North Korea. We want to be able to establish, constitutional, democratic, free government in North Korea. So I want to continue to dedicate my life for this effort. I know I have become the chairperson of a coalition for North Korean freedom. I regret that the South Korean government has passed the anti-North Korean leaflet law. I learned that Park Sang-hak is missing right now. During this week, I like to propose this. Moon administration in South Korea, if they prevent the information to flow into Korea, into North Korea, I want to raise in other countries that we want to go to the North Korean embassies in different countries. We want to share, like we want to almost like physically throw the leaflets into the embassy building. I tried that in Spain. I'm even in New York. I know there is North Korean embassy, and I want to like dump a leaflet into their building. So the North Korean embassies are, bombarded, in all these countries with the leaflets and information. Maybe North Korean government will plead to South Korean government, please, dismantle that law of anti-leaflet. Maybe North Korean will pressure South Korean to lift the law. Now, North Korean people want to reform and open the society. Now, but they have to have a roadmap, and I think these defectors can help them establish the roadmap so that their hope and plight for freedom is more concrete and have a more direction and trajectory. And we like to assist in that effort. We have made a draft of constitution for North Korea already, and we want to promote, individual freedom and right to own private property and election. These are some of the core values that we want to instill in the constitution that will be for new North Korea. And I believe that's one of the gifts or the best gift that I can provide for my people in North Korea. I thank you, Suzanne, Scholte, and Dr. Pavel Klein of Isabella Foundation. And this is very early in the morning, And I thank you for my colleague for this freedom movement. I wish this kind of event can be happen in front of White House or even in the United States, Congress. I regret that we cannot meet in person, but but I'm grateful for this online event, and I wish that waiting for that time to meet in person. I encourage all of us to continue to work hard. And I especially thank you again for Suzanne Scholte and Dr. Pavel Klein. Freedom for North Korea, democratization in North Korea. Let's all work together for this. Again, thank you. Great to see you, Dr. Suzanne Scholte, and thank you Kim Sung Min for organizing us at the last minute. Thank you very much.
So, with that, if I could introduce Hensue, she left North Korea in 2016. She attended school in Pyongyang. After graduation, she worked as a liaison office for South Korea for 2 years. She worked at a North Korean overseas restaurant in Cambodia, and she's currently attending Seoul Chugye University for the Arts. She has been a panelist on the South Korean TV show Now on My Way to Meet You, which is a host show featuring North Korean defectors. She will talk to us about challenges of international humanitarian aid to North Korea. So Hansu, thank you so much for joining us, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. 안녕하십니까? 저 목소리 들리시죠?
Oh, can you hear me now? Can you hear my voice? Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. My name is Sue Han. So I was working at Pyongyang, the overseas restaurant. So first, let me thank you all the stakeholders and organizers for this meaningful event. And I just want to say this is my first time participating in a meeting or a session like this. And then I am a little nervous because I am talking with other North Korean defectors and organizers who are in outside of the country. And I am Sue Han, and I lived in North Korea, and I probably wonder why I am here. And when I was working at a liaison office for South Korea for 2 years, and then I started working at a North Korean overseas restaurant in Cambodia. But then, and naturally, because I was working overseas, so there was a lot of like restrictions and directions, and you should do this, you should not do this, and then because they basically, but then like, and then after once you, and then I met this guy. I ended up loving this guy more than the Kim Jong-un. And then I don't know how that happened, and it's just like this is it's like the flower that bloomed without fear on the border. And I felt like I wouldn't be able to live on without him. And a lot of people actually said that it was meant to be. It was the heaven actually arranged our love and our meetings. And if there's really there is God, and I don't know how we met. So basically, I met the South Korean guy in when I was working overseas, and then it was the first time. And then I could die for love. And then so we just escaped, literally risking our lives. And then we actually we were holding poisons in our hand, thinking that once we're captured, we're going to eat this poison and then die together. And it's hard to describe, and then you wouldn't know because I experienced the North Korean defectors. There were 35,000 people. They really risked their lives, and there are people who ended up dying, escaping and looking for freedom. And I lived in Pyongyang when I was in North Korea. And then there are people in the rural area in North Korea, and then the living conditions. Or so when I talked to them and then heard their story, there was a really big difference. And then so let's think about it. Why would these people have to cross the river? Why did they have to cross the Tumen River, risking their lives? I mean, think about it. If there's enough food, if there is freedom, if there is no threat to their lives, why would they cross the river? But and I was North Korean, and I still have my parents living in North Korea, and the humanitarian aids are great, great. I mean, I like that idea, sending materials and food and aids to North Korea because there are my parents living still there. But when I lived in North Korea, there are many aids coming into North Korea, the UN, the cookies, and I never received any humanitarian aids actually. So um, there was this the cookies that I received in UN cookies. So when I was a child, when I was in school, someone told me this is the cookie that General Kim sent you so that you can behave and then study harder. And I just thought that the UN cookies, the name of the cookie, like the Lotte sandwich or the choco pie or the whatever but then and another then, and there is this the medicine coming from the Yuhan the company, and then from through UN. So there is the medicine aid for tuberculosis TBs. And then, as you said, as you know, and many people suffer from tuberculosis. And then one of my siblings, younger siblings, and then the medicines actually work so well, I can tell. And then this is the really humanitarian aid, and that are sent from UN to help people who are suffering from TB. But the North Korean people actually have to pay for them. And then for example, my mother had to work so much and then made money and then actually purchased the medicine. And then whoever has these medicines, the price is what they call, like if they want to charge twice of the price, and then they can sell one vial, they can sell two tablets, whatever they want. And even if you have money, and then there are sometimes the medicines are not available, so you cannot buy it. So the conclusion. So I was I actually failed to permanently treat my condition. So I have to just have this symptom for the rest of my life. And then sometimes I wake up. Oh, I'm talking about my sister, and then she could have continued with the medication, but then she could not consistently taking the medicine, and then she has this TB permanently for the rest of her life. And when I think about that, I wake up in the middle of the night, even now, and then it's just wrong. It makes me so angry. And then in Korea, when you cook rice, you just use rice and then you just rinse rice with water, and then you just put in a pot and then start cooking. This is like a dream story in North Korea. You just have to pick out the shells of the rice and then tiny stones. You have to do that work all night long. My grandfather was doing that, but I know the South Korean government sent a lot of tons of rice to North Korea, and the rice we received when we were in North Korea was so different from what I can have in South Korea. So where did that all go? So I think the humanitarian aids actually, when it ends up in North Korea, and then they just do switcheroo. They just switch it off, and then the bad grade rice, and then not the pure rice, and then the rice we receive, it's not white. They're very dark because so. So no matter how much South Korean aid comes into North Korea, it doesn't actually reach a North Korean. So I can say honestly, when was that? When was that you gave us humanitarian aid? Because I haven't experienced once when I was in North Korea, so I just don't know. I know the notion of it, but then I don't know what it is from my own experience. And humanitarian aid is that basically it's helping people who are in need based on humane intents. That's how I understand. But you have to make sure these humanitarian aids actually reach the people in need, the North Korean people. And still in North Korea, there are many people who blindly give their loyalty to the government, and then we have to change their minds. We have to open their minds, and then we have to let them know. And there is a saying that when the people of the country are stupid and ignorant, then the leader will do anything he wants or she wants. So, and well, like for what it's worth, and then thank you for listening to my story. And then I appreciate this opportunity to voice out my opinions. And so please continue to have your interest, and your please continue with your effort to help North Korean people. Thank you so much.
Much indeed for that very interesting presentation, a very sad presentation. So with that, we open the floor to questions, and I very much appreciate everybody staying on to answer questions.
Pavel?
Yeah.
I was just going to make a suggestion if because we had asked that question to Kim Sung-min in the beginning, and then our guest got on about what he's hearing from his informants inside North Korea about what's going on inside. You know, what information we don't know. You know, did they have COVID? Did they have 0 cases like the WHO? Like they claim? I'm just interested if, and then we'll start the Q&A, but if Kim Sung-min could just comment about, you know, what's the reality of what's going on? Are they going to have an arduous march? Are we prepared for massive starvation? We see the thing.
The recent news in North Korea, there were already 1,800 Chinese tourists in North Korea, and they already spread COVID, not just in Pyongyang, but all over North Korea. So I think it spread very fast. They don't say that people died of COVID. They say acute pneumonia or acute fever. So a lot of people did die, but they don't say it's COVID. And North Korean government they ask all the dead to be burned, and not government provided a gasoline to use to burn the dead, but it spread to all over North Korea, and they said Pyongyang cannot reach Kim Il Sung where Kim Jong Un is. They said it's about the life and death of the state, and then it began to die down a little bit for a while, but afterwards, now this second and third wave is going through North Korea. That's our estimate. I think North Korea is is a hit throughout North Korea, the third wave of COVID. And they're trying their best to get some vaccine into North Korea. That's what I hear.
We have had Mr. Lee Wee-ruk join us, and perhaps we can ask him to say a few words. One of the interests of Isabella's foundation is to see how the orphans are dealt with in the orphanages. What is the situation there? And I think that's a topic that Mr. Lee Wee-ruk may address. So if the interpreter wouldn't mind just alerting Mr. Lee
네,
Wee-ruk
말씀드리겠습니다.
to the fact that we'll be asking him to speak. And if everybody else could put their microphones on mute, please.
발표하면 돼.
So, Mr.
네, 잘 들립니다.
Left North Korea in
고아 상태에 대해서.
2010.
네, 알겠습니다.
He had been at an
2010년에 북한에서 탈북을 하셨고
from 1998, aged 11.
8년부터 11살까지
he has got a bachelor's degree in criminal justice at Dongguk University.
동국대학교에서
Then
검찰학을
master's degree
공부하셨고요.
in forensic science in Dongguk University. And he's now a PhD candidate in North Korean affairs at Dongguk University. He will talk to us about the circumstances of North Korean orphanages and orphan rescues. So, Mr. Lee Wee-ruk, thank you so much for joining us, and please tell us your experience.
네, 안녕하십니까. 오늘 북한 고아들의 인권 실태와 구성에 대해서 여러분에게 발표를 하게 된 이위력이라고 합니다. 먼저 이 귀한 자리를 초대해 주셔서 너무 감사하고요. 앞으로
First of all, so I will speak for about 5 to 7 minutes. So I would like to speak about the reality of North Korean orphanage. So first of all, so how the structure of North Korean orphanage, and the second of all, the children, the orphans from orphanage, how go out to the society and then settle into the. And then thirdly, I'd like to speak about why we need to help them to escape. And first of all, I feel like I need to introduce myself. And I was born 1988. And actually, my father was policeman, and I was well off. But then my father was persecuted, and he ended up going to this concentration camp for political criminals. And then my mom went to China to make money, but then she was actually human trafficked. So she was sold. And then we just didn't have anyone to take care of us. So like in one day we ended up in orphanage, and I was 8 years old, and my sister was 10 years old. And then I settled in on an orphanage, and then I have lived there for 7 years. Then I served in the combat unit of the military. And then while I was serving in the military, I had one purpose. And then I wanted to become a party member of the Workers' Party of North Korea. And then because my family was all broken up, and then I had to rebuild my Korea by joining that the party. But then I was working 6 days a week without getting any paid for 3.5 years. But now I still could not become the member of the party because the reason was that you don't have a good background because your father was a political criminal. And then so it turned out I had no future in North Korea, no matter how hard I tried and make efforts. I just couldn't make it on my own. So I left North Korea in 2010. So 2010, in August, I came to the South Korea, and ever since I have been living in South Korea. And I'd like to talk about how the orphanage, the normal orphanage, was run in North Korea. So since I only have the first-hand experience about the orphanage that I was in, so this is mostly like the North Hamgyong province. There is 3 official orphanages, and then there is one in Gilju, and then Cheongju, and the Gilju, the orphanage. That literally, this is the elementary schools. So the grades school would be, and then the middle orphanage, and then there would be middle school students. And then there is a special orphanage for people who became an orphan because of their parents' divorce. So ever since the arduous march started, but then the characteristic of the orphanage has changed because later on they just put us all together, and the regular orphans, and then the orphan has one parent. We just all became started living together. And there was this one single woman was actually raising this orphanage, and then she would receive the benefits and aids from the government, and then she would send these orphans to the combat units in the military, and then there is this collection, or the collecting space close to the train stations. Initially, they would actually collect, like, capture orphans and then put them in that post. Then later on, they were sent to orphanage. And then it's just very inhumane. Let's say the Kim Il-sung or Kim Jong-un said, let's capture all the orphanage on January 1st. And then they will put them into this facility called like a protection facility. And then after that, about 3 months later, they would be sent to orphanages. And then second of all, like how orphans actually go back into the society. And there's nothing special about it. And then first of all, and then if it's regular people, once they graduate, they either go to another school like college or go to army or something. But then the orphans are different. And then so this is called that a group collection. So they would just move as a group wherever they can be fed. So my own experience that like I was experiencing the similar thing, and as I said that although I worked really hard because of my bad unreputable background.
근데 다른 친척의 아이를 자기 집에서 먹이고 성인을 키워야 되는데 그게 안 되게 되면 거의 불가능합니다. 그래서 소수라고 말할 수 있습니다. 근데 이 친척 집은 이 아이를 데리고 오면서 당국에 도장을 찍어야 되고 이 아이를 끝까지 보증하겠다라는 도장을 찍어야 되는데 그런 좀 위험한 부담을 대부분 안 하죠. 그래갖고 소수라고 볼 수 있습니다. 고아원.
So I was let me talk about the orphanage again and the human rights of the orphanage. And then first of all, abuse, assault. I don't know what you think of this like abuse and assault, and then it's quite serious, and then you probably have received a lot of photos, and then they're very short. So we're talking about 16, 17 years of age, but then they're only tall as elementary school students in South Korea. I'm sorry, I have a text I just received. I need to oh, somebody says that I need to speak slowly. Okay, so and there are cases that children actually end up dying because of the beating. And then even if the teacher killed the children from beating, but then they're not going to be punished because officially on the paper, it will be reported that the children died of diseases or something. And then sometimes the orphans are in a fight themselves. And then some people just say that, well, how can they be in a fight that ends up in death? But then this is a survival. And then they learn a violence from the teachers. And then just like if you hit this other kid with a fist, you're still weak. If you use a baton or a club and then beat this kid up, that you're stronger. So basically, the cruel reality of it is that there are people, there are kids that were killed by the teacher by the beating, but then there are more orphans who ended up dying because they were in fight and ended up killing each other. It's a terrifying situation. And then thirdly, they die of labor, and then they go the farming, and then they go to mountain to collect the woods and so personally, we liked going out to the field to work, to farm. Actually, we like that opportunity because like it's the probably only opportunity for us to go outside of the orphanage, the outside of the fence. And then we work like it's a private work for the teachers. And then when we go out to work for them, they actually have to prepare food personally, not from the orphanage food, so we could taste the food outside of the orphanage. So we really liked it. And then I'm sorry, all of a sudden the sound quality deteriorated a little bit. It's a little bit difficult to understand Mr. Urios. And then, so lastly, I want to speak about freedom. And basically, in North Korea, there is no freedom. But then it would be right if you understood that people in orphanage, the orphans and orphanage, have even less freedom than other North Korean people. So, because if you go outside of the fence of the designated orphanage, so that's illegal itself. You cannot go outside of the orphanage. So, for example, if an orphan wanders about on the street, and then if foreign people actually end up seeing an orphan on the street, that's a shameful thing for the leader, our leader. So, the orphans cannot go outside of the fence. And then, as I said before, when we had to go out for private work for our teachers, we were able to go outside of the fence, and then we actually like that. So I don't have many time to so there are many details I'd like to explain, but I can answer later if you have more questions. And another thing is a sexual abusement. And then let's say a girl is just a 5, 6th grader, but then if they have developed a little early, and then they will be sexually abused, they will be touched, and then they will be actually dragged to someplace else, private, in front of us while we're watching. So sometimes they get pregnant, but then the teachers they don't want this to be reported, and then so they had to go through this the forced abortions, and they all think it's the girls' the fault. So let's talk about the diseases that North Korean orphans suffer. For example, like skin rash. So you know that all over my body, and then there are rashes, and then it's infectious. So the orphans, all of the orphans, and then well, actually, well, this is a horrifying situation. They would set up campfire in the orphanage backyard, and then they put this chemicals for disinfection, and then they made us to gather together and then cover us with blankets so that we can actually disinfect it by this fire. And then it was so hot, and it was unbearable. It's almost like a torture for us. So that was most horrendous experience that I can recall. And then I want to talk about the basic living situation, the food, sleeping, and so it's very dirty. And then there are many the bed bugs and the insects, and maybe someone are trying to eat breakfast somewhere, but then I just have to talk about this unsanitary situation. And this was a part of play for us. And then let's say you capture this bed bug. Since this bed bug ate my blood, if you eat the bed bug, that means you get to eat your own blood. And just something like that actually happens. And during winter, and then in winter, so they don't really care, like just the girls or boys. We will be all gathered together and then forcibly put into this like large bath space. And then during the winter, officially you can only take a bath once during the winter. So that's why these like horrifying situation, the kids end up eating the bed bugs. And during the winter, the government give you just one pair of clothes. And then Mr. Sue Han actually mentioned about UN AIDS. And the orphanage actually received a lot of UN AIDS. I mean, so without the AIDS, we will just die. The orphans will die. And let's say the UN AIDS supply us with flour, but then I myself never ate the bread that was made by a white flour. So the reason being is that the price of white flour is twice of a corn. So they would actually receive this flour, then they go out to market price and then sold them, and then buy corns instead, and then bring the corns into the orphanage and then gave them to us. So while I was living in there for 7 years, so we were starving. So not even the corn. So we had to eat the skin of so skins, and then the shell of rice, and then this is what happened. If the children eat this, and then they're because it's so rich in the fiber, so your stomach will be swollen so big, and it's so very painful, and then you could die. And then like a lot of people, and then so the teacher will be saying, this is bad for you, so do not eat it anymore. But then the kids are hungry, so they will still eat it. So I think I've already said it, but then it's very simple. We need to help them out of North Korea. And then basically the whole North Korea is the country of slave. It's a slavery. But the orphanage, the orphans within North Korea is even worse slaves. And North Korean people, you can farm, you can do trading, you can actually work and at least try to make your living. But then orphans are like trash. They're like dumped into this one place and then neglected, and then they're not even allowed to work for themselves and then try to make living for themselves. And so we just help them. We just have to rescue them. And then the will to live, will to survive, I think it's many times stronger than regular, normal North Korean people. And in China, I just interviewed one person. He was an orphan in China. And the girls would be sold somewhere else, but then he has to go through a series of hard work like mining and other stuff. And in South Korea, well, they actually, at least in the beginning, the orphan who skipped from North Korea, even after they defected to South Korea, it was more difficult for them because even North Korean people have or try to have distance from these North Korean orphan who defected to South Korea. So I'm just rushing this stuff, but then like I just want to emphasize that there are ongoing need and dire need to help them to rescue. So I think I shared this photo, how malnourished and short these orphans are. So thank you for your attention and time.
Ms. Lieberuk, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I have two questions, and we will be running out of time, unfortunately. So perhaps we can continue the conversation later on. But for now, the first question is, are the conditions in the orphanages now as bad as they were when he was there? The second question is, how can we help the orphans now?
I understood. Okay, first question is that I'll answer your first question. I can only guess about the current situation about orphanage in North Korea, but there's a limitation of how about the fact finding because I'm not because it's been a while since I defected. But if I were to guess, I'm sure it's worse than before. The reason I think that way is this, that Kim Jong-un is talking about the arduous march or march of suffering. And the orphans will be the worst victim of that march. Now, since Kim Jong-un's administration, they have promoted the orphanage that the socialist North Korea will, they promoted the North Korean orphanages. But I knew that it was a show. It was just because, the problem of orphanage, cannot be taken care of on one orphanage. They just set up a showcase, but it does not affect the entire orphan situation in North Korea. And as for rest of orphans in North Korea right now, this is like a post, Bali, the farming town, agricultural time. They are drawn to the hard labor of weeding on the barley field. So we didn't have a proper tool. We had to use stone because there were maybe 200 orphans, but they only have 30 tools. So the younger children have to use a sharp stone, and we line up. We have to be presentable. So we actually sing and march, but that's just to hide their suffering. So what I guess is the current situation will be, at least it will be as worse as I was before or worse, because under Kim Jong-un's regime, they are talking about this march of suffering, and I believe that the orphan will suffer worst in that situation. Now, how we can help is this. I think it's the direct aid to orphanage will have a most impact. When I was in orphan, I saw foreigner 2 times. At one time, they took the most malnourished children were taken pictures, and another time they took most well-fed orphans were taken pictures. So one was most malnourished, and the other was when they were well-fed. So I think they took those pictures so that they can see before and after of the foreign aid. They wanted to show that. So before the aid, they take malnourished children. That doesn't mean that the situation of the orphans were improved. actually, when you increase food intake suddenly, actually more children die. More children die because they don't take any fat content, because they take corn grain powder. If they give a ramen or some sort of a fat content, they suffer diarrhea and many of them die. So under that situation, the foreigner has to directly go to orphan. They have to do fact finding, and they have to be directly involved with the aid. There are many aids from South Korea or from United Nations. None of those materials, aids can get to the orphans. So you have to first hand go to orphans and do some fact finding, and then actually give them, the material. And whatever you do, you'd have to be more involved, more close monitoring, and provide aid. Yeah, thank you.
Logistical difficulties that we had, we won't be able to cover questions that we had hoped to cover. We will not be able to ask you all the questions that we had hoped to ask you. So I would like to thank you all. So I'd like to apologize to the audience that we didn't get around to your questions. But unfortunately, we have had significant logistical difficulties. As a sort of final wrap up, I'd like to ask Suzanne to sort of bring the meeting to a close. And I'd like to thank all the speakers for taking part under such pressure. I know that this came to you in an unexpected way, so I really appreciate your being able to do this at such short notice of change, and share your insights and experience with us. And we hope to be able to follow up on this. The purpose of the Freedom Week is not just to talk, but for the talk to lead to action, as Suzanne's motto is acta non verba. And we hope to follow up with you all after the week. So Suzanne.
Yeah, well, thank you so much to Dr. Pavel Klein and Isabella Foundation and our wonderful guests. And I do want to thank the audience for hanging with us. We've had to endure many challenges. I have a feeling there was something else going on with some of the technical problems we've had. I'd be interested to hear from Jason, but we probably had some cyber attacks going on. But I thought the witnesses were outstanding, and we certainly can make a video of this and kind of cut out some of the times where we had lags and such, because there was so much really valuable information that was shared. So I do want to thank everybody for hanging with us and participating, and especially Isabella Foundation for covering the topic open borders. There's such a wealth of areas about that particular topic, and we gave you the heaviest number of topics tried to cover, but it is important. I think it's very valuable to know that the fear that we have with the humanitarian aid is we've always felt we want to send humanitarian aid, but we wanted to people there to the point of consumption, for the monitoring that it reaches the point of consumption. And I think we certainly had that underscored with our witnesses tonight, with how it was misused in the past because it wasn't properly monitored. They didn't allow it to be properly monitored. So thank you again for everybody for being here. And Apogee Chayubakan. Apogee Chayubakan.
Thank you, Suzanne. Pavel 박사님, thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Pavel. Thank you so much for the participants. Thank you very much. Thank you. Our thanks to you, gratitude and appreciation. Thank you so much.